analyst, any decision maker who needs information from the mission support business functions can approach us, and we can work with that analyst, that stakeholder to best serve their requirements using these enterprise tools that are all web-based that anyone in the department can have access to. The data we publish has gone through a governance process. It's from the authoritative sources, so we can measure the data and our confidence in it before as we release it to you. So you can interact with us that the data we publish is of high confidence and of high value. All right. So with that, I'd like to open it up for any questions. Sir.
So go back to the health metrics slide. So do you have historical data on each one of those? And I'm sure you do. Would you be able to project data if you put in simulated criteria to whatever to get an organization to green or to get a functional area to green?
So that's a great question. I'm going to give you the answer in multiple parts. One, it will have trending. The data will be refreshed quarterly. Ultimately, we're going to start, right now we have what's called the Big Bang migration. And that means we migrate all the data on a quarterly basis, and all the data we can't migrate until all the KPIs have been received and gone through quality control. We hope to compartmentalize that and be able to upload the data as it comes in, so we don't have to wait till it's all. But right now we can trend quarterly, and we actually have the ability and are rolling out capabilities to identify the top trending up and down ones. And to your point, at predictive modeling, or predictive, we actually have a tool inside the department that does predictive modeling very well. It's paid for, and we're meeting with some of our other DHS stakeholders on the mission side, the data framework program, to look about taking some investments they've made in predictive modeling and adding it to our suite of applications here.
Division or group wanted to use the tool for other data sets, what is the process for us to get access to this tool?
Okay. So I'm going to take that and answer in two parts, because your first question was how do you utilize it, but if you want to add data, that's a nuance of the question. So again, enterprise technologies, Tableau, ArcGIS Online, meaning anyone in the department can be provisioned access. Through our answer facilitation process, we can spin up a web app working with you to understand your requirements, to understand what type of answers you're trying to get out of the system. That's with the data, the functional data that was outlined on this slide. This is component data populated, right? All our components are populated with this data. However, if there's data you want to augment into this analysis, we could work with you. Tableau has got a great blending tool, and as long as that data could be provided in a machine-readable format, we can blend this data with your data to spin up that web app. And we would make a strategic decision on if that has enterprise value. We would put that probably into our sprint backlog and see about how we could curate, consolidate and curate that specific data set as part of our formal repository. But for a one-off web app, we could easily blend it with this data with the data you guys have. And we would encourage you to work through our answer facilitation process to determine the level of effort and how quickly we could spin that up. Does that answer your questions? Yep. And once we spin up web apps, we also have then the ability to turn analysts into their own content creators, right? So right now we're using a centralized model, answer facilitation, not unleash the analyst, which is a decentralized model, to drive new content. Ultimately though, these tools we've procured we can put in the hands of users and analysts, and they can produce their own content. And we can provide them the governed access, where instead of we have to spin up a web app, go spin up your own web apps. Does that make sense? And that's ultimately where we want to go, is to provide access to users so that they can do their own analysis. The trade-off of answer facilitation versus unleash the analyst is we're generalist. At the centralized Cube program, we don't necessarily understand the nuance and context that the policies and programs have on their data. And so our ultimate goal is to give you guys, the analysts, the tools and training so you guys can create your own. That all makes sense? Ma'am?
So the data that comes in the web app, and it comes from the different tools, is it a snapshot in time or is it updated once you have it in the web app?
The web app keeps it periodic with whatever the data. So our HR data comes in every 2 weeks. So anytime you interact with that web app, it will have the data as it was within the last 2 weeks for the HR data, the building data. So we have periodicity schedules. Real property is quarterly. Personal property, like our motor vehicles, could be nightly or weekly. So the periodicity of the source data impacts the periodicity in the Cube and the web apps. But it is accurate and as current as the source data provides it to us. So like HR 2 weeks, real property quarterly. So each of those data have their own schedules, and we try to stay true to it as possible. And the web apps are not a snapshot in time. They're pulling the most current data available in the system. Sir?
This tool looks like it would be handy to the JRC. Have they plugged into this in terms of joint resource planning and they've gone through a leadership transition? It's still formative, but has this tool been recognized as any value?
Yes, quite a bit. I've worked at GRC, and under the last year, their leadership changes. Actually, 3 of the individuals who used to be in the GRC are actually now under. One of my deputies is actually an ex-GRC member, and so I've worked with the GRC, and I think there's absolutely some better opportunities to partner with them.
Finding parallels then across
Yes.
the landscape?
Yes, absolutely. I think if we could get some stability with the new leadership there and the new analysts, especially with some continuity that we've got from ex-JRCers on our team, we could really drive some partnerships.
Good. The second question is on your incident response on the tactical level. I used to be a senior watch officer at NOC, and we put together a common operating tool and certain metrics and reporting data that's real time. Have they used this, or is this something that...
This goes to the NOC as well. It goes to ops, it goes to the NOC. This is one of their reports that they reference.
So it plugs into the common operating, right?
It does. And the GII is actually a source for us, and we're a source for them. So we actually take layers from Cube, publish it to GII, so the COP and COOP can actually pull those layers, like the workforce and the buildings layers, into their reports as well.
We have overseas travel data. I remember during the riots they had and the overturn with the Arab Spring, we had a harm's way report that I had to correct, that I had to put together, and it dealt with a lot of Department of State data where people were overseas. Do you have that?
No, not today. So actually one of the next evolutions of this is we know most of the components run a web EOC, a web, Emergency Operations Center system. And our next evolution is to capture in a consolidated manner the web EOC and the operations data from events and incidents and start to feed it against these layers.
I think the key there was the Department of State held the data.
Yeah.
And it's only valid if you report to that location and say that you're touring in Morocco or wherever. So we had people scattered all over the place and tried to assemble them in safe places, and it became a very manual function.
Gotcha. That'll be interesting. We'll take that because we do have other government agencies through the GII data layers that we can pull in. There's 600 different data layers that we curate through the incident infrastructure. And so things like the National Hurricane Center. So when there's a hurricane, they're publishing the real-time data of that hurricane. that's a layer that we pull in through the National Hurricane Center and the GII. So we have the ability to get the FEMA floodplains, the storm surge, other examples of layers that we put on top of this to create that view. The Department of State would probably just be another layer if it's available.
Yeah, that's great.
So I imagine you guys aren't intending to be the source data for a lot of what you're building in visualizations, true? Or like the source of the information, I guess, would be components.
So we hope to be the authoritative reporting system, not the auditable system. The business transactions happen at this level. The data is then consolidated at this level and ingested and integrated at this level. This is the lack of consistent business processes, data dictionaries, configurations. I mean, we have to do a lot of translation at both of these levels to do enterprise reporting and analysis, right? The example I always use, in the motor vehicle, we have 52,000 motor vehicles. You call it an automobile, you call it a sedan, you call it a vehicle, right? How do you normalize and report those 52,000 items? So CRSO owns that. They say motor vehicle is my data standard. When you modernize here, we want you to call it a motor vehicle. But for now, when you see your automobile, it's going to be a motor vehicle. And then here. And there's a key difference here is CRSO and this data mart can do reporting and in-depth analysis on those 52,000 vehicles, because that's where the financial transactions, the fuel transactions, the maintenance transactions, the telematics data is coming in there to do in-depth vehicle analysis. Cube doesn't want to do all of that. It wants to do integrated analysis. So that odometer readings for the year, total cost of operations, total fuel consumption comes up here in the aggregate, but the transactional details are here. And so I talked a little bit earlier about a community of practice. When our requirements come in, we say, do we have the data curated well here? If not, let's go to our partners who would have it here and get the more granular data at the transactional data from the data marts. So there's that relationship. Cube's not the be-all, end-all. It's an integration layer. But through our community, we have access to the data marts that house that more granular data.
Yeah, that's, I think you're touching on exactly what I'm headed. So CRSO, are they driving new definitions for data? So that especially if you can look at data across components that are similar but not the same.
Yes.
Or that and we're also at the same time, right, modernizing and getting new tools. So we've got this chicken and the egg thing, and then who owns it, it's defining. That's where.
Absolutely, right? So I'm hoping that our methodology is we're defining the data standards here. We're then making sure we have consistency, coming back to that location, consistent across the location dimension, consistency across our who dimension, which is the org chart, so that we can do that common enterprise analysis and reporting here. But ultimately, we need to drive the data standards adoption at this level, right, to reduce the burden through the translation level here. And that's where I think we haven't invested in data management and data governance practices to the ability we need to drive data interoperability at this level. And that's where I think if I could influence it, I want to invest more in there, more resources in the data governance and data management. And with some of the new acts coming out, the January act around that creates a chief data officer and a chief evaluation officer, hopefully we can start to invest more in that area. Any other hands?
I have one.
Yes, ma'am.
A lot of our research and our data is to answer questions that we're getting from the department and maybe reporting live. Is there currently any work or ongoing work with the DHS CFO to maybe standardize or leverage the Cube to answer some of the questions and reduce the number of data calls?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So that's a common question is how do we insert ourselves to reduce the burden of data costs? Last thing we want to do is, if we already have the data, is to put a manual burden on the components. That's not productive for anybody. Ironically, Stacy Marcotte is my co-chair. of this ESC. So every 2 weeks, I'm briefing her on our progress on here. She is our co-chair along with the deputy CIO, Stephen Rice. So we are still looking for ways to insert ourselves into like the FOIA process and into the exec-sec process so that we can say, hey, exec-sec, you don't need the data call. We've already got that data, we've already curated it. We can answer that question for it without putting that burden on the components or anyone else. And then using this model, either it's in Cube or we can farm it into the data marts at the mid-level without putting that burden on the Cube. And we can then answer in a single enterprise voice instead of then having to take that data and cobble it together and understand, because then if you do a data call, there's a level of effort to drive it to uniformity. Sir?
Two real quick questions. What is your source for financial data? I'm guessing it can be like tier data. And two, some of the stuff that's on there, I imagine that would have to be eaten out.
So first answer is CFO Horizon and tier, not Data Act yet, although it's in our backlog. We are, I know with one number coming down the line, that's also going to influence us, and so we're looking to partner with that one number initiative quite a bit to understand how that impacts the CFO data model and then impacts the roll-up in the Cube. Everything we house is in here is below the law enforcement sensitive designation. Our data governance is share first with controls. So with the DCXOs and with the JPT of the 14 level, we have that governance to say, here's a new requirement, new request for data. Are we comfortable releasing it, or do we need to release it in a redacted area? We do have specific controls already. Although we have robust workforce data, we have no PII. So we have what's called the TIE, the Trusted Identity Exchange, between us and Chico as we ingest data from the Human Capital Data Mart. What we do is we give a personnel handler identifier and strip out that pie, but we're able to still track attributes about every individual, like their title, their job series, their retirement eligibility, their PPAs, their fund codes, right? Anything that describes an individual without PII by using the Trusted Identity Exchange and the personnel handler ID. So we don't have to worry about PI or PII, and anything that's law enforcement sensitive, that would go over to the data framework and we would house it there. And we're looking for better. Part of our backlog is also starting to pass data through guards up to the high side in LAN A so that we can partner some of this data with mission essential functions. So for an incident, we can say what is actually the most critical impacts. So we are looking at how do we take data harnessed on the low side, pass it up through guard to the high side, and start driving high side analytics. That make sense? You good on time? All right, guys, I really appreciate it. Hopefully next year I can invite a couple of you guys up here to be an advocate for me and an evangelist for how you guys are using Cube to help solve your problems. That would be great. So please don't hesitate to contact us.
Thank you, Mr. King. On behalf of the CFO, please accept this small token of appreciation.
Thank you.
Thanks again.